Hi, and welcome to Drive Your Message Home with the Right Dashboard. My name is Kelly Hotta. I'm a product consultant here at Tableau. So today we're going to be talking about using dashboards to really drive that message. We're going to learn some tips that will help you create dashboards that achieve their goals and really have that impact on your audience. So I joined Tableau about 6 months ago, over the last 6 months, I've learned a lot about dashboarding. The first couple dashboards that I made, I don't even want to look at anymore. I thought they were great, obviously, at the time, but as time went on and I saw more and more of the dashboards that are posted online and from my colleagues, the more I realized that a well-designed dashboard really, really stands out right from the beginning. And so I hope that today's session will help a lot of you kind of explore that ability to use dashboards in the right way rather than just put things on a sheet and kind of, throw things together without much thought. So we have a pretty simple agenda for today. 4 main parts. We're going to be talking about what is a dashboard, so what makes a dashboard better, what makes some dashboards more effective than others. Then we'll be talking about some practical design tips when you're creating the dashboards, some really fast kind of where to place things and what colors you should use and when. We'll be talking about making sure your message is clear. And then finally, where to get inspiration. And this is something that I think is really important, to always be kind of looking and seeing what other people are creating really helps you stay on your toes and kind of not feel safe in your picture perfect and all your templates that you may have created. Okay, so first, what is a dashboard? Well, Stephen Few's definition of a dashboard is the one that I really like. A dashboard is a visual display of the most important information needed to achieve one or more objectives, consolidated and arranged on a single screen so the information can be monitored at a glance. That's a mouthful, but my next question is, well, what's a dashboard, but what's a good dashboard, right? So we all kind of know what a dashboard is, but what makes a dashboard good? Well, putting together a dashboard is not just about throwing some sheets together, right? The point of a dashboard is to help people make decisions or take action. And a dashboard that doesn't achieve either of those call to action or change someone's perspective on something or let them explore something that they hadn't seen before, well, that's just selling your audience short. So we're going to learn a few simple ways that you can improve dashboards to make them really powerful. So not just a dashboard, but a really good dashboard. And just to reiterate that point, a dashboard is not supposed to be yelling at someone, right? So with a bad dashboard design, no matter how hard or how loud you're yelling, no one's going to hear you. So that's also, of course, why designing them with care can be important for all of us. So are all dashboards the same? Well, of course not. I don't know if any of you have traveled to Thailand, but same but different is what they say. And Andy Kirk has a definition that says, well, there are 2 main types of dashboards. So there are exploratory dashboards, and then there are explanatory dashboards. So exploratory dashboards allow the user to explore them and find his or her own story or insight from that dashboard. Explanatory dashboards, on the other hand, they just tell the story. So they tell it how it is, and they kind of make their point heard. So in an exploratory dashboard, the message might be about finding out where our sales could be improved, for example. Explanatory dashboards might be telling us right away where our problem areas are rather than have us explore it through filters and actions and things like that. So let's look at some examples. So here's a sales dashboard from our online gallery. Let me just open that up, and we can take a look at it in the browser. So is this exploratory or explanatory? Well, let's take a look at the components really quickly. So on the top, we have our most important numbers, so our total sales, number of deals, and so on. We can also see the trend in our revenue here. We can filter our view, right, by our different regions. And then we can even see each individual's performance as well. So this type of dashboard is, I would say, exploratory, right? Because it's allowing the user to go in, pick out a certain mark on the chart, drill down, see what's going on, and choose their own adventure. So let's go back to our presentation. Now, what about, okay, so that's exploratory and neutral. So it's not projecting an opinion. It's just stating the facts in a intuitive or in a way that the user can explore and find out what's going on in the business. What about this dashboard? Well, right away you can see that it's a completely different feel, right? So compared to the one we were just looking at, so this is a dashboard from the South China Morning Post, and it's looking at the number of deaths in Iraq over time. Now, this evokes a completely different feeling. As soon as you look at it, I mean, it's political, it's opinionated, and it's explaining the story to you. So there's no way for you to explore this visualization. And you can see also that there are various design elements that try to get that message across. The color, right? The color is red, just like blood. There also the bars are going down instead of up. Again, trying to evoke that image of blood flowing down. And of course the title, right? Iraq's Bloody Toll is not exactly a neutral title. Right, so this type of dashboard, we would say, is explanatory and is also opinionated. Now, this particular example of an explanatory dashboard is political, but that type of dashboard also has a place in business. So just because this example applies to newspaper articles or something like that, what if we had changed the title? Sometimes if you create a dashboard like this, you're just trying to tell a story, and that's okay, right? So if we just flip that chart around, change the color and the title, well, the story has changed completely. The deaths are clearly on a decline, right? And so sometimes you're not just trying to create dashboards that look at business as usual. Sometimes you are trying to tell a story and to show insights or change opinions within your organization. So which is better? Well, like all things, it depends, right? So are you trying to persuade someone of something? Do you have one key message that you're trying to get across? If so, then you probably want that explanatory dashboard. Or do you want the dashboard to be able to answer many questions, depending on who the user is? Is it just for monitoring your business over time? Well, if that's the case, then you probably will be fine with an exploratory dashboard. But regardless of what type of dashboard that you're going to use, the end goal is the same, right? We're using these dashboards in order to make better decisions, better data-driven decisions, and make changes that are going to improve our status quo. Okay, so now that we know what a dashboard is, well, how do we create the dashboard in an effective way? And that's where these practical design tips are going to come in handy. So the number one is size. So when you're choosing the size for your dashboard, we don't want to choose automatic. So we don't want to set the dashboard size to automatic, meaning the dashboard will adjust to whatever screen it's being viewed on for various reasons. In terms of aesthetic and design, well, say this looks fine on my computer, but someone else opens it up on their iPhone or iPad, and it looks like this. So now, obviously, this is not an ideal way of viewing the dashboard that I created, right? Everything's kind of squashed up together. You can't really see what's going on. All my titles are cut off. And so that's the main reason in terms of designing these dashboards, that they just won't look good on other screens if they're automatically adjusting like that. The second reason is if you have a lot of users hitting your server at the same time, well, performance might suffer as well. So you'll have a bad user experience because Tableau is not able to use its cache to store the tiles. So it's going to recreate and regenerate those all for each user, and it's gonna affect performance. So the recommendation here is to pick a size and use it across your organizations for the same dashboard. So this way you avoid having your dashboard show up in the wrong type of layout, and also you won't be stuck with a ton of people in the same dashboard and experiencing lags. Secondly, do we want to use floating items? And this is, I personally use floating legends a lot, and it does bug me sometimes when they move around where I didn't put them. But it really depends, you know. You just have to be careful when you're using floating items. So in this case, this is a dashboard that we've put a big floating text field here, and the users can filter by the region. But what happens if they filter to Europe? Well, now we're covering up all of Scandinavia, right? And so that's not, and also Africa down here. So you just have to be careful with and check how the view is going to look with each of these filters applied and your floating items. So I think with floating text and with legends, you just have to be careful. With 8.1, obviously, the legends are transparent, and you can make them transparent, so you can overcome some of that. But I do find that that still obscures some of the background image, so it would avoid that still. So just be careful when you float. If you don't use it wisely, your message could be obscured, as it is in this case. Placement. So this is a study that was conducted that tracked where users looked, so where their eyes were, and the amount of time that they spent, and all these hot spots that you see are obviously where more time was spent. And you may notice that a lot of time is spent in the top and in the left, on the left-hand side, and that's because of the way that we read. So people kind of drift across from left to right, and then go down to the next line and go again, and they kind of lose interest around about here, right? So the majority of the time spent is in the top left corner. So if you do have something like a logo that you're placing on the view, I would recommend that you just put that in the bottom somewhere, because it will get noticed, maybe around the bottom left or the bottom right even. It will be in the periphery, but it won't detract from your analysis, and that's what you really want people to see, right? So for an example, here is a dashboard from Tableau Public, and it's exploring food imports into Australia. And it's trying to see why they failed. So the top left, which is what we're looking at now, is a map. So the main focus there seems to be, well, where did these food imports come from? So China and India immediately stand out, as so does Italy and the US, right? What if we just change the alignment here? Well, if I put instead the type of failure, now right away, people are going to focus in on this first and see that the majority of the food rejections were because of a microbial, whereas they wouldn't focus as much on the map. And maybe I want this to be the focus of my analysis, right? Why are these food inputs failing? What should we be scared of here? So just by changing that positioning, I've changed the message completely with the exact same data that we just saw. Consistency. Now this is a viz by Ramon Martinez on the Health Intelligence blog. And as you can see, it's a message about infant mortality. Now, this is a complex dashboard by any measure, right? The message is complex, and the presentation takes an amount of reading to interpret it properly. So there's a lot going on. However, it's exceptionally well laid out and formatted, and that's what makes this kind of daunting viz seem approachable. The colors are clear, everything's neat, everything's very well proportioned. So a lot of effort has been put into this visualization to make it easy on the eye, but at the same time still convey a lot of very important insight and information. So what would happen if he didn't do this so well? And so we've taken this visualization and kind of changed all the colors around. And immediately you'll notice, well, now it's a lot harder for me to figure out what's going on, right? So the bars are switched around, so I have to go from up here seeing euro and then down here, and I can't really tell what the difference is between these. And it's hard to see the relationship because now the colors are so dramatic, whereas before they were quite subtle and I could still tell the difference between them, but they didn't stand out as much. Immediately now I'm looking at this and focusing all my attention here and not really know what's going on. So we probably shouldn't have cut off the title here, but regardless of that, it's still very confusing, right? And we're also using different color schemes, but these are all measuring kind of the same, they're measuring the same thing. So we should have streamlined it all so that the user understands what the color means, doesn't have to rethink about it every time. So color is a big one, right? And here is an example that I made. I'm not proud of it, and it's just to display what we see quite often: people using color randomly, right? So we have pie charts going on. We also have the stacked bar, and there's tons and tons of colors. And for those of you who are at Max session, probably know already, but the human eye can't process more than 8 colors at one time. So generally speaking, we don't want to see more than 8 colors in a color legend. And when you look at this stacked bar, it's almost impossible to tell what's going on, right? So first of all, use colors sparingly, and don't mix different colors together and use bright colors where it doesn't really make sense. So normally, bright colors should be reserved for areas where there's an outlier or you're trying to point something out to the user, because as soon as someone looks at it, that's where they're going to focus. So speaking of color, though, I don't want you to shy away from it, right? So color can be very powerful. So although you should be very careful and, use color with some sort of purpose. So don't just use it randomly. Using color in the right way can be very powerful. So this is Max, one of our sales consultants in Australia, built this, and it's exploring the popularity of football compared to other sports in Australian newspapers. So let's take a look at the interactive version. Do it some justice here. And so he's used colors. They're not shy colors either, right? But he's used red for football because he wants the user to focus on that. And that's clear in the title as well, right? He wants to see how football compares to the rest of the sports. And you notice he's chosen lighter colors for the other sports, but they're still distinguishable from one another. They're just not as bold as the viz that I created. right? So this way, not only that, he allows the user to understand what's going on. So I can select one of these sports to highlight it below. And again, everything highlights and I can see what's going on here. And so color can be used to produce a visualization that's very powerful, such as this one. You just have to be very conscious of the way that you use the colors and what kind of message it's going across to your audience. So how do I make sure that my message is clear? So we have all these design tips under our belts now. And if you listened to or attended to the other visual design session, I'm sure you have a few more. But what about the message? What about the message we're trying to convey? How do we convey? Sorry, how do we make sure that that message is clear and it's coming across in a way that the end user can understand? Before we get into some examples, it's important to ask yourself, well, who is your audience, right? This will have a massive influence on the way that you design the dashboard. Are they your colleagues? Are they teams that you're trying to target? Are they, you know, is it your boss? Is it, so whoever it is that's viewing the dashboard, you need to take that into account, right? For when you're designing what you're making and how you're conveying the message, whether you want it to be exploratory or explanatory. That also depends on your audience. The second question, of course, is, well, what is your message? And that may seem obvious, but we see a lot of people start building dashboards not knowing what they're trying to say or even what question that they're asking. And that happened to me when I first started. So I'd get some data, start making some pretty charts and trying to make something that looks good. It was not until one of my colleagues asked me, well, what are the questions that you're trying to answer, that I had to kind of step back and be like, okay, let me think about that before I start building something that really doesn't have much meaning, right? So before you get started on building something, finding out what is that question that you're trying to answer. What is that message you're going to convey in the end? That's very important, and we see a lot of people skip that step all too often. So this example, also from Tableau Public. So we're using a lot of examples, if not all of our examples have been from Tableau Public so far. This is an analysis on Bigfoot. So Bigfoot sightings across the U.S. and it was called Finding Bigfoot. So where can I go to find Bigfoot? Let's, I guess I didn't set up the link. But essentially, right away, as we spoke of earlier, the top left, right? The most important chart is on the top, and it's on the left as well. It's the map. So it's basically trying to tell you this is where you can find, you might be able to cite Bigfoot, and right away, of course, the whole West Coast seems to pop out. Now, below we have a trend, but it's not really the focus, and then we have some details as well on the sightings. Personally, I mean, this is a very powerful dashboard. I'm not sure if I would have made it red, you know, because red to me is something that really has a very strong association, a strong feeling, and also it really stands out. So maybe it was used so it would stand out, but for me it looks kind of more sinister than it should. When I look at this, it looks like Bigfoot killings or something. So what if we changed it around? And it's kind of what we did earlier when we looked at, what was it, the food imports. But what if we change this around? Like, what if I changed some of the layout and the colors? Well, let's see. So I just took that same viz off of Tableau Public, changed the colors, and then I moved the map to the bottom. And instead I focused on the trend. I also changed the title, right? So now it's Bigfoot sightings on the decline. And that's, I mean, even without the title, I think that the message would have been clear because the focus now is that timeline. And you can see that of all of this, all of the of all of the seasons, the summer is the most likely time to spot Bigfoot, right? So again, you need to decide what your message is and then tailor your visualization around that message and make sure that you're focusing on the right things and you're using things like the color and the size and all of those design elements to achieve that message or to convey that message and achieve the goal that you're hoping for. So this is a quote that I found that I thought was appropriate. If you do not know how to ask the right question, you discover nothing. And it's probably something that I should paste in my, or should have pasted on my computer when I first started, because like I said, I would just jump into building without thinking about, well, what am I going to build and why am I building it? Okay, so this kind of goes hand in hand with what we were, this is just another example that I thought would be interesting to explore. So I have, let's open up the actual visualization here. So most of you have probably seen this. It's the number of bird strikes. So the number of birds and, well, not just birds, the number of animals that are hit by planes. And this is the original visualization. The title, Beware Deer on the Runway, and he has deer highlighted here. So a surprising number of deer are hit by planes. And, you know, we have, so that's the main focus, right? So what kind of species is affected by these collisions? And on the bottom, he does have a map which suggests that the east coast of the U.S. and the Midwest as well has the majority of these strikes, right? So a lot of the strikes happen in that area. And so this is a pretty telling, I mean, very interesting visualization. But what if we, again, what if we changed it around a bit? And we're still using the same data, but what if we displayed it in a different way? How would the message change? So I'll go back to here. And now this is Kelly Martin's from Viz Candy's version of the same data, just displayed in a different way, right? So now we're seeing, well, how many strikes happened. And although it looked like a lot was on the East Coast just now, it looks like now that they're mostly in California, right? And Texas is also big. But maybe that's, I don't know why that is actually. Maybe that's because of the population, or I'm not sure. But right away we do notice those two things. The way she's laid it out though now is, now we're focusing on where these collisions happened, right? So she's created this scatter plot with the altitude at which the collision happened, along with the speed. So she even adds a reference line here to put things into context. So this is the takeoff speed, and this is how many collisions happened. We'll notice right away down here is that a surprising number of collisions happen on the ground. So it's the same data, but it's just displayed in a different way to tell a story about where the collisions happened, whereas the original version is telling us what type of animal was hit, rather than where they were hit or at what time or, you know, at what speed. So depending on the way that you're going to display the information, obviously your message and your objective is going to change. You have to be just aware of that and make sure you're choosing the right type of visualization and the right display of information. Okay, let's examine a little more with another example. So this is a dashboard showing diabetes in the US. Let me just, can't open it, so let me just open that up. Okay. And right away, this is telling us that there's a very high the prevalence of diabetes in the U.S. is concentrated seemingly in the South, right? But what if we changed something? I mean, what if we added more data to this to see what would happen? Well, let's take a look here. Well, we have the number of farmers markets here. What if we brought that on the view and sized the bubbles according to the number of farmers markets? What if we took a look at how that affected the chance of diabetes? And well, it looks right away just by looking at this that the more farmers markets you have, the lower the incidence of diabetes. Right? And obviously that's a pretty big generalization to make, but right away, just by adding some more data, right, we can change the story here. So it goes from being a story about where diabetes is most prevalent to, well, why? Why is diabetes more prevalent in those areas? And maybe that's one of the answers to that question. Okay. So the next piece of advice is to make sure you're getting that point across, right? So here's another example showing the performance of technology stocks in 2009. So it's just showing the change in stock price over time. Well, what's the message? It's hard to tell. I mean, they're all kind of going up, right? They're all increasing on the same sort of slope. But that doesn't really tell us much. We want to know what the return on investment is, right? So that should be a percentage change, not just a change in the price. So this might be better if we change the calculation. Oh, none of my links are working. I'm sorry. Hold on. So now instead of having this be just a change in time, what if we go in and we make this now a percent difference? Now, instead of doing it percent difference from the last day, we want to do it relative to the first day in our data set. And immediately, let's go back. You'll notice that if I bring my color legend in here, we'll see that, well, Rackspace is completely blowing everyone else out of the water, right? And in our previous view, that was almost impossible to tell. So use your data to tell a story that is meaningful, you know, rather than just kind of show points going up and down and not really making it very clear to your end user. Use that, and this is the actual viz, the original viz that we took. And again, he's using red, right? So you'll notice right away that a lot of people tend to use red when it's something they want the user to see immediately, right? And focus on. So by changing the type of calculation, making sure that we've used the data in the right way, we can actually tell a much more compelling and powerful story that, you know, Rackspace in this case outperformed the others in a massive way. All right, so the next idea here is to distill the data. Now, this was an article about iOS and how it's outperforming and outshining Android. This was the visualization that they used. But what if we change that around a little bit? Now let me see if, okay, none of my links are working. I must have changed a folder name, sorry. Let's see, okay. So let's open that up. And now we're looking at, oh, not that one, okay. The original the original viz here. And what if we just change this around a little bit? So let's go to the sheet. And instead of looking at all of these as lines, let's look at them as an area chart. And now let's see if we can do it as a percentage of out of 100%, right? Rather than have it be and that means we have to do a percent of total. Now, instead of computing using the table down, we're going to compute using the operating system here. We have to, I think this axis has been pinned, so let's just get rid of that. Okay. All right, now we're looking at something that might provide us with a little bit more insight. So the article was about iOS. So let's see if we can just group up everything else. So it mentioned iOS and Android. So I'm going to group everything else up into other. So I'll hover over one of these, group them. And now we're looking at the gray being iOS, the black being other, and the green being Android. And again, in this case, since we're focusing in on iOS, I want to make that green. So I'll just change those colors around. And make sure that we're okay. There we go. We can even add maybe the labels so we know what's going on. So now we can see that iOS has hovered around 45% or so. But it also looks like Android may be gaining some market share here. Next, let's see the map that we were looking at. Well, that looks pretty all right to me. Let me see if I could change this to a percent of total rather than using market share. And then we're going to compute using, again, our operating system. So now we can immediately spot places where iOS is not actually doing that well, right? So iPhones aren't dominating, for example, in Portugal, looks like. But everywhere else except maybe the UK actually seems to be doing pretty well. All right, so let's go back to our dashboard. And now, we can move things a little bit around. If I go back to our slides here, I have the finished dashboard we can look at. And now that we've distilled that and gotten rid of all those extraneous pieces, I think this is telling, a more clear story. So iOS continues to outshine Android, but is the story changing? Is Android gaining some market share here? And then, of course, we can see the map as well and where those places may be. And again, Portugal stands out. So in addition to distilling the data, enhancing the data is also a very powerful tactic. So sometimes you just need more data than you have available to push that message home. So Felix did this Red Bull jump, and there were 3 amazing measures of his jump. The height, he was at 128,000 feet. The speed, which was 834 miles per hour, and then the time it took, 4.5 minutes. Now Ben Jones did a viz about these 3 numbers, but he realized that that message, how amazing this jump was really hard to explain without some context. So let's see how he accomplished that here. So this is his viz. First of all, you may notice that it's very tall, and that probably was to echo the height of the jump, perhaps. Tall vizes that make you scroll down, are fairly risky because you risk losing the interest of the audience. But in this case, I think it was quite powerful and it worked really well. Now, let's look at each of these visualizations separately. So the first is, how far did he fall? So taking a look at this, obviously you'll notice that everything is put into context. So the reference lines that he's used, the beginning of space, for example, and the speed of sound. Oh, that's in the next one, sorry. So this is the beginning of space, Mount Everest, right? So you can compare the distance that Felix fell to Mount Everest, and that really drives home that message. Again, he's using red for Felix, just so he pops out in this visualization. And again, just using that extra data that he had to drive this message home and really make an impactful visualization here. The second question was how fast, and this is where the speed of sound comes in, right? So he exceeded that speed, and he's comparing it to a Concorde airliner, a bullet, right? So these things are things that we would think of as very fast, a tornado wind. And when you compare his jump, the speed of his jump to these very familiar things, that's when the power of context comes in, right? So he's putting these all into a context that we can all understand. And he is literally faster than a bullet. So the last question, same idea, how long does it take? And it's the same, thing, right? How long does it take for light to travel from the sun to Earth? And Felix's jump was shorter than that. I love this Tom Petty free falling reference as well. It's just such a powerful visualization. It's so simple. And I think the simplicity is also what gives it that power. And speaking of which, keep it simple. So, a lot of times we have so much data and we want to get so many messages across, and we kind of forget that sometimes simplicity is the most powerful. In this case, again, this is one of Kelly Martin's visualizations. I really think she does some amazing work. And it's looking at housing prices across different states in the U.S. And here we can go and pick a state and say we bought a house in April of 2006. It will tell us then what that house would be worth, right? And we can see, well, okay, what if I bought one in Los Angeles? And immediately, because of the ability for this to for the line to color depending on what city you're choosing, it's so powerful, right? You can see the differences, but you can also right away spot the city that you've selected. And choose your words wisely, right? So the title is the first chance for you to get that message across. So in the examples we looked at earlier, right? iOS massively outshines Android in Europe. Is the story changing? Big settings are in decline. And how fast did he go? So these are sorts of titles that really grab the attention of your audience and then reel them in with the visualization that follows. So not only should you use titles that tell your audience what you're trying to say, there are other ways that you can provide that kind of guidance. And after you've spent weeks or days or weeks on a viz, you're familiar with every mark, right? Every legend, every point on the chart, you know and you understand. But once you publish that dashboard, the only way that the person that's viewing it is going to understand it is if you help them, right? So they're not going to understand the viz without some guidance. And you can do that with providing some instructions, using the tooltips wisely, including titles that are descriptive and tell the user what you're trying to portray, right? So these are ways that you can get around your user being completely lost and saying, hey, your Tableau Public is ugly and confusing, and that's not somewhere where any of us want to be. And so that actual, that article is actually a great resource to some of these concepts of using size and color and making sure your dashboard is usable and not confusing for your end user. Okay, so finally, inspiration. Well, where can I go? And as you may have noticed, we really use a lot of Tableau Public today. So, of course, that's our #1 go-to. The amount of material and work that's up there is astounding, really. And, of course, those blogs. So VizCandy is one of my favorites, as I mentioned earlier. Our very own Mac Brylat has his own blog as well, IC Data. There's a Viz of the Day, which you can subscribe to and receive a Viz every day. We have our Zen Masters, of course. We have user groups. You can hold your own Viz competition. We encourage everyone to, use Tableau to collaborate, to inspire each other, to create an experiment and see what you can come up with. So that's the end of the presentation. I'll just end with one last quote. If you torture the data long enough, it will confess. Thank you.